Well, first of all, thanks so much to ArtsLink and Kate for inviting me here. I feel very honored to be here and participating in this, this really wonderful and magical event. Just a little background on myself. I went to art college. My hope was to be involved in the arts somehow. I went to the Minneapolis College of Art and Design to study graphic design, industrial design. Then I kind of switched over to fine arts and did painting and sculpture. And I think, though, that the most impactful class that I had when I was in college was just one class called Creative Problem Solving. And I had an amazing teacher. I didn't really realize the impact of looking at problems as opportunities and challenges as something that could be overcome until after I graduated. But I remember one project that I did, and I turned it in, and I didn't have a lot of money, and I used that as an excuse. And I said, well, I really didn't have enough money for this project. And my professor just kind of looked at me like, mm-hmm. And it was that look, I just felt like a puppy, and someone had taken a newspaper and slapped my nose. I'm like, oh, I just never wanted to have that feeling again. And I think it had something to do with sort of, don't use excuses. Live up to your potential. And it was that kind of look like, oh, you can do better. Not only that, you can do a lot better. So that was sort of in the back of my mind. So after I graduated from art college, I was very fortunate. And I'll do a little asterisk here because a lot of what I'll be presenting today was also in my workshop. And if you've seen the online video of a smaller presentation that I've done, there's some overlap there too. This is an expanded version. So if you've seen that video, pretend to be surprised at some of the slides that you might see. But really, I was fortunate. I was able to find my dream job right after college. Okay, maybe it wasn't exactly my dream job, but I had this idea of living out in the country, and I took a job selling shoes at a Buster Brown shoe store. I did that for 6 weeks to make money because really my dream job was just one step away. I started a house painting business. I thought, oh, selling shoes, well, what skill am I ever going to have in selling things? Probably not much. But I'll start a house painting business. So the money I saved from selling shoes, I started a house painting business. And after 2 years, I'd saved $10,000. And I thought, well, that's surely enough to buy your dream farm in the country. So I was able to do that. It's a little bit of a fixer-upper. I had no doors, windows, plumbing, or electricity. But other than that, I was pretty much ready to go. So, and this was just about 3 miles outside of a town called New York Mills. When I negotiated to purchase the house, it was actually listed for $20,000. And I negotiated with the realtor and found out, I just asked, how long has this been on the market? They're like, oh, 4 years. Why do you ask? I said, well, I've got $10,000. That's my offer. Tomorrow it's going to be $9,995 because I've got to buy a burger. So you've got 6 hours to oh, wait. So sure enough, by the end of the day, they accepted the offer, and I had this wonderful farmhouse with 15 acres. What happened was that I started working in the community. I had no idea what I was going to be doing with the arts in the small town. And I ran out of money 3 different times. I painted barns to make a living, painted houses to make a living. And what happened over the period of 2 or 3 years is I listened. When I was up on ladders, I talked with farmers. I would get invited for dinner, which I found out was at noon. So I had a lot of preconceived notions living in Minneapolis, moving to a small town, what that might be, and they totally went out the window. To have conversations about opera and poetry and art and aspirations and dreams. And I thought, it's just not fair. In a small town, there's not those same opportunities and access to the arts. And so I thought, well, what can I do? So I finally got a loan from the local banker after I was turned down for 2 different grants for a project to do with the arts, because I said it wasn't possible. I went to the local banker and said, I've got this idea. And he said, well, okay. So he loaned the money so I could finish the farmhouse. But it wasn't until this happened. A friend gave me a little toy plastic tractor. And I'm like, that's it. Everything came together. I'll form a nonprofit organization. It'll be called the New York Mills Arts Retreat. The tractor will actually be the logo to symbolize cultivating the arts, breaking ground, cultivating the arts. The goal, simple, become a national model for rural arts and economic development. So when I told this to the bank president, he's like, sure. Okay. Or in Minnesota, you betcha. So as I approached this work, I came to think, what's the philosophy of moving forward? The audience is everyone. I firmly believe that. After talking with farmers, business people, teachers, in a small town, if you have demographics and say, this is exactly the type of person who's, no, forget it. If the audience is everyone, how do you create access to farmers? How do you create access to school kids? How do you create access to the Main Street business people? Access to the arts builds community, and programs should be designed to weave the arts into the fabric of the community and gain community buy-in. And this was the finished, renovated farmhouse for artists. So part of the conversation with the community was about how do you create a program that's a win-win for the community? How do you do that win-win? So friends of mine who would come up to help me work on this farmhouse were like, this would be a great thing for artists. And so that's where the tractor really came into play of, okay, what about starting a residency program? So I talked with major arts institutions in Minneapolis and said, I've got this idea for a residency program, what do you think? Every single arts institution, including the State Arts Board, said, no, that's not possible. And that's not how you do a residency program. So with that rejection, I said, well, I'll just do it anyway. But why reinvent the wheel? Why have like an arts colony or a residency center? Why not do something unique? So we hosted one artist at a time. That artist would create a proposal to create a win-win for the community. And each one would be different. And I couldn't possibly think of some of the creative proposals we had for working with the community, whether it would be with the school, or working with the grain elevator, or working with senior centers. After I was in the community for about 3 years, I was eyeing this building. And actually our first artist in residence, who was from France, saw me looking at this during her residency. And she said with a very rich French accent, I see how you look at this building. You should get donation. And I just thought, yeah. So that sounds like a great idea. So I found out who the owner was. I found out that it had been abandoned for a long time. It was the first brick building built in the community. It was falling apart. The bricks were falling off the back of the building. The ceiling upstairs had sagged so much it was a 10-foot ceiling. You could touch it. There was a kid's swimming pool to hold water. I mean, it was just in bad shape. So I asked him about a donation with a little asterisk as well, and said, would you donate this building? And I had heard via the grapevine that he was looking to perhaps donate it. And he said, sure, I'll donate it. And I said, well, not so fast. We need some money to start our capital campaign. And he said, well, I'm not going to pay you money to take the building. Well, 3 months later, I had lunch with him and his wife, and they not only donated the building, but kicked off our capital campaign with the $12,000 gift, which helped us when we went to the city council and for funds of $35,000. That doesn't sound like a lot, but it's the equivalent of a metro area like Minneapolis giving $13 million to a project. So when we asked the city council for money, it wasn't just all of a sudden. I had attended city council meetings for 2 years just to become familiar with the community. We started a membership campaign for an organization and building that didn't exist yet. So when we went to the council, we had over 100 members and memberships signed up. We had community support, and we really tried taking away reasons for the city to say no. So ultimately, they said yes, and instantly became invested in the success of the project. And 2 days before the center opened, the mayor, the school superintendent, they were all in the building helping to paint urethane floors and get it ready for opening. And this is the renovated gallery space. It also doubles as a performing arts space. We would hold music events as well as gallery receptions. How do you make arts accessible? One of our exhibits was a fish decoy exhibit, which was extremely popular. Our board was like, well, what does fish decoys have to do? Well, New York Mills is surrounded by lakes and fishermen. So how do you get fishermen involved in the arts? Have a fish decoy exhibit. It was one of our most popular exhibits and got people in the door. Also, when we first opened the doors of the building, the economic developer in town was very suspicious of giving money to an arts project. And as a caveat, said, well, we're going to do this city survey to see if people really are in favor of this project or not. And I said, okay, that's fine. Sounds good. It also provided a baseline for economic data for the impact of the cultural center on the community. And so when the first survey went out, it came back a year before the cultural center opened, and the response from the community was 67% of people in the community thought it was a bad idea to give money for the project. And our board was like, what are we gonna do? Like, nothing. We have the money. This is not a real problem. This is a perceived problem. So just wait a year until it's done, and let's see what happens. So what happened was the very next year, the same survey went out, and sure enough, 68% of people said, oh yes, this is a great idea, and the city should continue to fund it. So what happened was the following year, after the city's commitment of $35,000 was done, we approached them to say, well, could you still continue to give us funding? We'll be the tourist information center, which the town did not have one. I said, well, yeah, we'll do that. We'll give you $15,000 a year. We're going to spend every penny of that promoting the community. This is an example of a collaboration with an artist in residence. This was Marcia McEachran. She worked with, we partnered with the local Senex co-op and farmers. And this was a gateway fence to the Senex station made out of discarded farm implement parts. And farmers actually had a say in how it was put together, and it represented different seasons. And these are two farmers that donated parts. They're putting out, that's my part right there. But it really was a chance to like break down that barrier. How do you make the arts accessible to farmers? Again, just part of the strategy is weaving arts into the fabric of the community. Community members become part of the process. Artwork can be in a public space. It leads to public investment in the arts. One of the side benefits of the city council giving money to the project was not only did they have a financial investment, they had a stake in the success of the project. And they're very proud of a renovated historic building on Main Street. By the way, as a caveat, they also said, well, we'll give you this money, but if it doesn't work, we want the building. And I said, that's absolutely fine. And part of the presentation to the city as well was reframing risk. So when the economic developer said, well, this is really risky, what if it doesn't work? I said, well, okay, here's the challenge, here's the real risk. If you invest $35,000 into this project, in 5 years, this could be a national model. If it's not, you get the keys back. So if the project succeeds, you win. Now, if the project fails and we invest this money, you can sell it for a lot more than that, and you're going to be in great shape. So if nothing happens, you're going to spend $40,000 tearing it down, and you're going to have a vacant lot. So you can have $40,000 for a vacant lot, or you can invest $35,000 in this project. To summarize, if it fails, you win. If it succeeds, you win even more. Take away the reasons to say no, and what was left was yes. The tractor logo symbolizing cultivating the arts was on the water tower in 5 years. That was actually somebody else's idea. I'd worked 2 years researching water tower painting companies and found out the company that would do it and provided them with the logo and then made a presentation to the city, and they said, yes, let's put the tractor up there. To the left were banners made by school kids to welcome people to the community. One of the most successful projects was the New York Mills Sculpture Park, which came about because the city economic developer at the time wanted to put in a fast food restaurant on the edge of town and was actively working to relocate businesses to the highway. New York Mills has a 1-block downtown. If you relocate businesses to the highway, the town dies. So I would talk with businesses after he would talk with them and say, don't do that, stay downtown. And so when he presented the idea of a fast food place right on the edge of town, he said, this is going to be great. People can get their food, they can get their gas, and they can be on their way. Progress. And people at the chamber were kind of nodding. As opposed to just saying no, have another option on the menu. So I said, or what if people were driving by the community, saw an amazing sculpture park, and decided to pull in, and there's signage saying, oh, here's a wonderful downtown where you can buy local, stay overnight at the wonderful B&B, spend money, have breakfast at the local cafe, and then be on your way. Which one sounds better? Oh, we like the one where people stay in town. Okay, so the city actually sponsored a $5,000 sculpture fence that was done by an artist competition. It was a 900-foot fence. Community members had a chance to make their own corn cobs on the fence. And this was the New York Mills Sculpture Park that was created. This tractor was made by an emerging artist, Ken Nyberg. I believe he started this when he was 67. He woke up one day, he was a farmer, and he welded grain elevators. He decided he was going to start making art. Made a big, huge 20-foot tall foot. And then just started making things like coffee cups, just like Klaus Oldenburg. He just was inspired. And so we commissioned him to do the world's largest art tractor. Access to the arts, why not access to philosophy? Started something called the Great American Think-Off, which was a philosophy debate that's still going on in New York Mills. When I presented this to the chamber and our board, they said, people are going to, philosophy in small town, what? I said, no, it's going to put New York Mills on the map nationally. And people laughed until CNN covered it the very first year. C-SPAN covered it 3 years in a row live, the debate. It provided an upward spiral of publicity for the community that resulted in new businesses relocating to the community. Thanks to our economic developer in the survey, we were able to track businesses that opened in the community. And after 5 years, this is the number of new businesses that opened in New York Mills. Increasing jobs 40%. In 2010, it was cited by the National Endowment for the Arts as one of the inspirations behind their Our Town program. Also in 1993, it was cited as a national model for rural arts and economic development by the Northwest Area Foundation. I always forget this, so I put this in the slide. Part of my background too is you know, and some of the skills like, okay, selling shoes or starting a house painting business, what does entrepreneurship or renovation have to do with anything? And I just put this in because I love telling this story. So let's take a break for a second. So before I moved to New York Mills, I could never really afford expensive cars. So I bought this car for $100. It was some kind of Volkswagen, not like a Beetle and not like the new car. It was something in between, that weird where they couldn't really decide what they were doing. And it was so rusty, it could barely run. And even in Minnesota, people would point at it. I drove it out to California, it barely made it, and people would literally point even more. And I thought, okay, I finally have to sell it. It barely would run, but it needed a new battery. And so I put a new battery in it, and I had an ad in the paper just to sell it for $150. I thought I'd make a profit. But the battery was too big, because in those VWs, the battery would be like under the front seat. And so the battery was a little bit big. And the old VWs, they had straw under the seats. What could go wrong? So like, oh, great, new battery, I'm going to sell this car. Da-da-da, put it down. And, you know, like, huh. Something's, what? Where is that coming from? I'm like, oh, the car's on fire. Wow. So I go in and I get a towel, and I'm like beating out the flames. And, you know, a person pulls up, and they're like, huh, is that that the car for sale? I'm like, yeah, that's the car for sale. But you can't buy it. They're like, what do you mean I can't buy it? It's on fire. Well, but does it run? Well, yeah, it runs, but you can't buy it. Why? It's on fire. Well, what if I just like buy it? Okay, will you sell it? I'm like, yep, but the thing is, it's on fire. So he paid me money. I said, okay, but if it this is it. If like a block away, that's it. We're good? Oh, we're good. So he drove away very happy with his smoking car. So I don't know. I just like telling that story about the car on fire. It has something to do with sales or something, but. Okay, so how do you do this work? So after New York Mills, I really took an inventory and came up with sort of 6 key ingredients for success. How do you do this? Vision. What's the big picture? What's the big idea? So many times people get lost and they lose the forest of the trees and they don't have a vision. Think big. New York Mills thought big. National model for rural arts and economic development. Philosophy. The audience is everyone, for me. What are the principles behind your work? Creativity, creative problem solving. How do you solve that problem or challenge? Do something impossible. Strategy. I love strategy and planning. Will. Just determination. Do you have the determination to do the project? So many projects happen just on that alone, and you thought, well, if they just had a little more planning or an idea, you see things happen all the time just on this. And then presentation. What's your story? What's the pitch? So often people forget this part, and it's so important of what that story is. They're either modest or they don't know how to tell a story, but how you promote yourselves and how you present it is just so important, and I think sometimes people forget this part. That's Minnesota. New York Mills is up top. Lanesboro is in the southeastern corner. Population of Lanesboro, 754. It's a beautiful town. It's nestled amongst bluffs that are several hundred feet high. It's a historic downtown. Unlike New York Mills, there's a 2-block downtown, and there's a river that goes through it. There's a bike trail, there's historic houses, there's also an amazing dam and river that goes through it. It's a world-class trout river as well. That was one of the appeals for me because I love fishing. Oh, I did something. Good? Okay, thank you. Only I can press a button and then something different happens. Okay, so I'll try. Okay, so when I moved to Lanesboro, one of the reasons I moved there is I discovered they really wanted to do a new arts center. And so I thought, wow, I could be in a community that has a river and fishing, even though New York Mills had lakes to fish in. It was right there. So I thought, yeah, this is great. I'll try this. I'll move to Lanesboro. I'll see how another community approaches the arts. But when I found out that they wanted to put this new arts, everything crammed into one building, I really thought about it. I'm like, wait a minute. I've just spent the past 14 years doing the opposite of this. Is this really what I want to be doing? So I proposed an alternative vision. What if, instead of all assets being in one building, and it was traditional, there's limited access and no promotion of walkability of the community, what if the whole town became an arts campus or an arts center? Be a new model, be more accessible, and promote walkability and connectedness of arts components. What about that? You could have arts literally all over the community. So I talked with 3 different arts organizations in the community. The organization I worked for was called Cornucopia. There was the Commonwealth Theater, and the Lanesboro Art Council, which was the oldest arts organization in the community that really helped spawn both the theater and the gallery. And I went to their boards, and the result was unanimous. Not even close. Even my own organization. Nope. What? And I realized I just broke my own rule. Part of what I did at New York Mills was just listen. I listened for 3 years, and it wasn't about anything other than listening about what the need was. And so here it's like, well, I've got this idea. Well, no, we have this idea, and we're going to do it this way. Okay, fair enough. Broke my own rule. Okay, what do I do? Well, of course, you just do it anyway. But the community actually thought the idea was pretty good, so they were behind the project. So I started working with community members. So worked on developing long-term shared vision and goals. Again, weave the arts into the fabric of the community. So one of the first projects was something called Discover Sculpture Explore Lanesboro. And this was a partnership with the city of Lanesboro, Forecast Public Arts, which is a nationally known public arts agency, and an artist in residence. So we did a call for artists. They worked with the town historian. She created a series of 5 different major medallions. This was the environment medallion. You can see the trout right there. She worked with school kids, seniors. We did one for the school, one for the business community. We had 5 different larger medallions and 20 smaller medallions all over the community with a little map so people could literally walk around the entire community, arts campus, discover sculpture and explore Lanesboro with community input and the town historian involved. Again, creating a shared vision. When I found out that the city of Lanesboro was looking to update their strategic plan, I'll help work on that. That's really boring work. Nope, no problem. So being able to help work on the strategic plan, you can integrate the arts into that, so it's part of the city's strategy. So like New York Mills, it's so important to have a relationship with your city government. And it's not always about asking for funding, it's about that investment. So with Lanesboro, it wasn't about asking for money, it was about asking for permission for yes. And that's what happened. When I moved to Lanesboro, there was no Chamber of Commerce, so I helped start one and became the first president because it was my idea. So it's like, okay, you're the first president. But the idea was to move from a loosely affiliated business and innkeepers to a chamber to promote the civic nature of the community and something larger. And that's something that I think was really important. But becoming the premier small arts town and culture destination in the Midwest later became the nation with the Lanesboro Area Chamber of Commerce. And again, we partnered with the chamber, we partnered with the city on the arts campus. And Lanesboro has received national attention. Prairie Home Companion did a live broadcast from Lanesboro. Prairie Home Companion was courted, Garrison Keillor was courted for 3 years by a local group called the Rhubarb Sisters. They were like the Andrew Sisters, except you just substitute rhubarb for all of the boogie woogie songs, and there you had it. And they pestered Garrison Keillor for 3 years until he finally did a show live from the Lanesboro softball field. And we had over 3,500 people cram into the softball field to hear Prairie Home Companion. And again, with the city, we worked to build an appreciation for the arts, secured public components of the arts campus, and the city provided a lot of in-kind support for arts programming. On the right is a slide of wayfinding signage that was created by an artist based on the town hall to decide priorities for the community. There was a grant that was received, and the community voted to have this artist do custom signs that really reflected the spirit of the community. This is Carl Unesh, who created a stained glass tractor. In Wisconsin, he created a stained glass combine that the city of Reedsburg purchased. He's from Lanesboro. One of the most successful exhibits that I've ever been associated with was called Steering. We worked with the Lanesboro Sales Barn, and it featured photography by local artists. The first time that I approached Joe Nelson, who owned the Sales Barn, I really wanted to honor this business in town because it was a major employer, but even a lot of the locals didn't know what it did. He had cattle trucks coming in every Friday. Many of the new people in town had no idea what this business was, and I thought, what a great partnership. So I approached him and he said no. Called him again, he said no. Third time he hung up. I'm like, maybe I'm not the right person for this. So I talked with Julia Borgen, who'd been in the community her whole life, and said, Julia, would you mind calling up Joe? And just, like, we want to really do something that recognizes the amazing work this business does for the community. So she made the call, and he said yes. Our sponsor was the Minnesota Beef Council. We had the Fillmore County Cattlemen's Association grill steaks in front of the gallery. We had over 300 people attend the opening. We had the local pub donate some beverages. It was incredibly successful. And it's exhibits like that that just break down the barriers of, like, how do you get participants? Make it relevant. So the owner of the sales commission, the sales barn, Joe Nelson, bought his first piece of artwork he ever had. And it was a photograph that he liked the most. Another exhibit we did was called Elevation. It was all about grain elevators. So we invited farmers. We sent out advertising in local farm publications. And one of my favorite stories was there was a farmer who would clearly just come in from the fields, and a couple of our board members were looking suspiciously, and I said, none of that. So he was very quiet, and I walked up to him and said, it seems like you've got a story to tell. And it's like, yeah, and he pulled out his wallet, and in it there was a very worn photo of a grain elevator. And he said, my grandfather built this, and do you want to look at it? I said, absolutely, absolutely. And when I think of that story, it's like, well, that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to invite people in to a conversation and make art relevant in their lives and to have that kind of power and impact. So in 2008, when the Great Recession happened, someone in the community came up and said, you know, what about that arts campus idea? I said, well, that's a great idea. And they were from the Art Council. And so after a 2-year conversation, our two organizations merged, became Lanesboro Arts Center. And in 2014, we rebranded as Lanesboro Arts. I like to say it took 8 years for the arts campus to be somebody else's idea. So even though we were working on different components of it, sometimes you just have to be patient. So basic components, again, are buildings that house the arts, pedestrian walkways, and arts in public spaces. Once we started our capital campaign, we hired a city planning group to work with us and the community. And rather than going through all of this slide on placemaking, the top part really is the most important. It's really honoring the community, looking at new things that we want to do, but looking at, okay, there's scenery, there's arts, there's recreation. It's synergistic. So build on existing assets to enhance the community and make it a more memorable place to live and experience. So the exciting thing about starting a capital campaign was also doing a feasibility study. So when I went with our board chair to do the checklist of feasibility, I said, you know, I did this in New York Mills too. We did a feasibility study, and it was a 5-second feasibility study, because I just said, yes, we're going to do it. So this time we actually had a checklist. We went through, and there was like 16 points on the checklist, and we both went through, if you're ready to do this, and we had 4 out of 16, yes. So he said, well, what do we do? Of course, we're going to do it anyway, because I really think that we can, and we're ready for it. So as we set this goal of $1.5 billion, a lot of the components of the project we had already done with the city and the community. But we didn't just ask for money from people. We asked for ideas. So we had community planning sessions and workshops about possible solutions to community challenges. And we got all sorts of great ideas that we never would have thought of without getting community input. We did presentations to the school. Every single kid in the Lanesboro school, from kindergarten through high school, had a chance to look at possible plans and provide input on their ideas for making the community better through the arts. This was and has been a community challenge since I've moved to town. There's a city parking lot. The Department of Natural Resources helped build it. Nobody really knew who was supposed to be operating it, but nobody parked there. So The outfitters would just park their canoes and nobody would park there. So working in the chamber, I thought, well, what's a way to turn this into something positive? And I thought, well, why not have it as a canvas for the arts? This could be part of the arts campus. We'll transform it from a city parking lot into a poetry parking lot. And we'll have haiku that's done by local, regional, and national poets, and have signage on the back as you're coming into town to say downtown parking. So we work with the archetype signs and the design firm to have signage that looked like it was part of the community. So they're historic streetlights. We wanted to have something that looked authentic and part of the community. So we got community input, and this was the font that they agreed on. And this is the actual poetry signage installed. We had an information kiosk done as well. Another community challenge that happened earlier on was the walking bridge. This was scheduled to be torn down. The city did not have enough money for it. Again, I talked with someone from the community, Julia Borgen, again. She's like, we should really do something about this bridge. We need to save it. It's, you know, and I did a little research. It was one of only a few left like it in the country by the Chicago Bridge Company. I said, I'll work behind the scenes. You be the person to help raise the money. Raised over $100,000 locally for the renovation, and the rest of the money, $300,000, was a bond that the city residents had to vote on to raise their own taxes to restore this bridge, and it passed by nearly 70%. And this was a key component of the arts campus because it connected the downtown with the walking path to the parking lot. A neat part of our collaboration, new partners came up. The Lanesboro History Museum. They decided, can we participate as well? Absolutely. So we worked with them to create new signage that talked about the importance of the Coffee Street walking bridge, what went into the renovation, and to inform locals and residents about what it was all about. In addition, this is inspiring new signage around the community to talk about other historic aspects. So the Lanesboro History Series and signage was started and is continuing to educate folks. So Arts Campus components also include the St. Main Theater. We renovated the St. Main Theater as part of this project. This is a production, it's a smaller version of Prairie Home Companion called Over the Back Fence. It's a 120-seat theater, and there's a variety show that happens every month there. We do performing arts series, poetry readings, music. This is our historic gallery building as well. We redid the facade, especially with our new brand, Lanesboro Arts. Changed the doors. Those are now 10-foot doors to match architecturally what the building was originally. One of the projects that was identified by almost every community member, especially kids, was a green space that initially I thought could be a sculpture park, but overwhelmingly the community wanted an amphitheater there. So that's what's being drawn up right now. Along the river, between the poetry parking lot and the historic walking bridge, is an amphitheater and gathering space. Another result of this project was creating a master vision plan for the community. What happened along the way with these ideas, once this was presented in a community meeting, people started looking at, well, what about this green space here? What could happen over here? What about the Gateway Park? Could we have different entry signs? It started getting people thinking long-term about the community and planning and the importance of planning. And being able to be an organization that can secure grant funding really started getting the city of Lanesboro to think about what the possibilities are. What could really happen? And as the arts campus really started to gel and come to a conclusion, I realized there is no conclusion. It's an ongoing project. This is ongoing. So when we wrapped up our capital campaign, it wasn't about we're done. It was about we're starting. This is the start of our project. But this document we're continuing to look at and improve. The city's using it to look at other possibilities as well. I was talking with Kate, I think yesterday, about what the next project that we're working on is, and it's helping to save the Lanesboro Dam. It was built in the 1860s. It provides power for the community. It's one of only 5 like it in the United States. It's so unique and historic, but it's been involved in a political hot potato for the past decade. And we have a new mayor that's been elected, who was a former board member of our organization. So he's very supportive of the arts. We have a female city council member as well, who is on the park board, who's also supportive of the arts, because the park board was one of the partners of our project as well. So having the city really starting to buy into, okay, how can the arts help solve other community challenges? What can it do? It's throwing out possibilities, and now the city's looking at those possibilities, even from the Lanesboro Dam. So we are doing a partnership with the theater and other environmental groups in our region. We're hosting an exhibit from the Smithsonian called Waterworks. And the whole idea of this exhibit was to get a letter of support from 2 politicians who were initially against the dam funding. Now they're for funding, and the dam is being, hopefully, in the next bonding session, funded for $3.6 million. But the idea was that Lanesboro Arts would have an exhibit that could help create awareness of water, of dam, of the importance of the dam for the economy, not just of Lanesboro, but the entire region. So how do you leverage arts to help solve community challenges? That's one way. And the project over the past couple of years has received national attention. These are some of the presentations that we've done across the United States. And again, this was part of my introduction. Receiving awards and accolades. Part of the conversation yesterday in collaboration was just talking about some of what your challenges are, but what your big wins are and successes. And part of what our organization is about when we rebranded as Lanesboro Arts was our new logo is actually a series of 3 circles. And as I was telling our board about the logo and what it represents local, regional, national. And an organization can work on all 3 levels and have an agenda that's a big vision, and that's okay. But it has to start in your community first, and it's okay to tell stories about that and to continue to leverage that success into other projects. And again, I really firmly believe that the arts has the power to transform communities. Again, in the workshop yesterday, talking about big wins and successes and the concept of isolation. Gatherings like this, people come together, share stories, share successes. I think that's so important to share those stories and ideas because that's what lifts people up. Because it doesn't take much. Often in the arts, it's low paying, and the reward has to be what you get back from it, from other people, and sharing those ideas and stories and successes, it's joint success, it's shared success. And I think that's so important. Just some numbers I'll go through quickly. 130,000, that's the sales figure for our gallery in Lanesboro. That's our annual sales figure. 30,000 is the number of people that we serve that come through the gallery or that we serve through the St. Main Theater or through our programs. 200 is the number of artists we serve every year. 170, the number of volunteers in our organization. Yes, it's still a town of 750 people. 10 is the number of new businesses that opened on Main Street in Lanesboro this year. 2.5 million in historic renovations on the 2 blocks of downtown Lanesboro since we announced the start of the Lanesboro Arts Campus Initiative. And again, in September of last year, the city passed a unanimous resolution proclaiming the entire town as an arts campus, becoming the first small town in America to do so. And I remember at our opening celebration, I almost forgot about this idea. And I had to tell Courtney, who is our assistant director, it's like, we have to talk with the city. And I talked with the city administrator. They actually helped draft the resolution. And even the most conservative person in the council was enthusiastic about the resolution. Thank you very much.